3, 2, 1. What's going on, everyone? You're watching another episode of Ash on Comics. My name's Ash, and here's today's comic. It is E-Ratic 2, or is that E-Ratic squared? I don't know. Looks like squared, but it's probably E-Ratic 2. It makes more sense. Recharged. I'm back. Woohoo! A little over a year ago, I barely knew who Kari Andrews was. I think all I knew about him was he did a Iron Fist story that I ran across. I think it was the story where it was like the little girl. He had like a little girl with him that was like the new Iron Fist, but she was like 6 or something. I remember at the time that thinking like that the art style was very interesting. There was something about it. It felt very amateurish. It wasn't quite polished enough, but there was something unique about it. And I've always been drawn to artists that have sort of their own style. There's definitely something to be said about house style, and I very much miss that. Back in the days, in the 80s, when I got into comics, you know, I was a big Marvel fanboy. And a lot of the comics had this sort of really similar house style. And I'm trying to think of like some examples. Like, for some reason, Bob Layton is coming to mind. But there wasn't anything wrong with that. It was really good for consistency of all the books. They looked similar. But at the same time, uniformity in art can also be a hindrance. And in the early 90s, we started to see, well, even in the late 80s, technically, but the early 90s where it really started breaking out in the image movement, we saw artists really kind of coming into their own. And I don't want to say coming into their own, but like really kind of just embracing some outlandish style. Todd McFarlane was sort of the first guy to really make it big by being really different. But you started to see like other artists, like Sam Keith is a really big example. If you guys remember him, most famous for his image books that he did, the Max. But before going into Image, he was doing some Marvel stuff. He was doing like some Wolverine stories, and his art was really out there. I remember discovering Mark Texiera. Oftentimes just went by Tex, and he did like Ghost Rider. I think it was in the late 80s or early 90s, and his style was just very different. We can look at people like Kelly Jones over on DC and Batman. The really outlandish, like super spiky bat cowl and the massive capes and stuff that today look really bizarre, but back then it was really cool. And I've always had, basically what I'm trying to say is I've always had a bit of a liking towards art that has a unique visual appeal. That doesn't mean that any artist that's unique is just going to be my favorite, but there was just something about Kari Andrews. Now fast forward to today, I missed the first E-Ratic as it came out. Basically, when it was on issue 5, which was the last issue. I think it was a 5-issue series. Maybe it was 6. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was 5. Everyone was been talking about this book, and I was like, first of all, E-Ratic's kind of a dumb name. The costume, it's not really a great costume. AWA Upshot wasn't really living up to my expectations, not in terms of quality, but in terms of direction. When I had heard AWA Upshot being pitched, I was told about J. Michael Straczynski was on one of like the board of creators, because they got like this little, not a community, but basically a committee. There's like 5 or 6 people, I think, at AWA that are part of this committee that are like the think tank. And J. Michael Straczynski is one of them. He's kind of a favorite writer of mine. I've been a fan of his since Babylon 5. And I was really interested. They're creating a shared universe, which is probably my favorite thing about comic books. That's why I got into Marvel. The whole idea of this fictional world and having this shared universe and it feeling alive, right? That the things that happen in this fictional universe, they're fake, they're imaginary, but they mattered in that imaginary sense. You could sort of get lost in the world. And I read comics for escapism. And I want to imagine for a short time that these fictional things matter. The more that they matter, the more I can escape. There's not a lot of shared universe. DC and Marvel are kind of getting rid of... They're kind of abandoning this. I don't know if it's because they think continuity is too hard to maintain. I don't know if it's because they hire people that just don't really like comics, and so they're kind of changing them into something else to fit what they're more interested in. I don't know. But when AWA Upshot was coming around, it was kind of at the end of Valiant's life. And Valiant I really liked at the 2012 to 2017. They're the best publisher in comics, bar none. They're just amazing. And I was like, oh, maybe AWA is going to do what Valiant was doing, making this show. I was very interested. And they launched these books called The Resistance. And that's kind of their little year one sort of thing. It's like their background story of how this world came into being as far as superheroes and things. It's interesting. And then they started publishing all these like one-off miniseries books. A lot of horror titles. And I'm just like, and I don't have anything necessarily against them, but they don't ever repeat. Almost no title ever gets a sequel. So it's always very much like, here's the next new thing. Here's a story about vampires versus Nazis. Oh, here's a story about a hotel that takes you to hell or something. Here's a story about Mexican human traffickers. Or here's a story about, various things. And it's not that the stories are bad or anything, but what I was pitched was a superhero universe. I'm thinking, oh, maybe like Valiant. Like if Marvel and DC are dropping the ball, maybe someone else can pick it up. And AWA just hasn't done that. And E-Ratic was the least interesting of the stuff that they were doing anyway. So I was like, whatever. But everyone was talking about it. Everyone was like, oh, E-Ratic. And I was like, what? Really? What? Really? And I'm one of those people that I don't like to just take what someone else says at face value. Like, if you tell me a book sucks, depending on how much credibility you have with me, I may believe you or so forth. But I won't ever like 100% just be like, oh, well, Joe said it sucks, so therefore it does. Like, I very much feel like I need to have an authentic first-hand account before I can put my testimony behind a book, So I couldn't say one way or the other about E-Ratic because I hadn't read it. Furthermore, a lot of my favorite books that I do read that have become favorites are books that people either urged me to or just somehow influenced me into reading because they were hyped about it or whatever. They weren't really on my radar until that, and I was like, oh, let me give it a try. And then it's like, oh, wow, this is the best thing ever. Well, this long-winded speech, and I get to the point, Ash. That's what E-Ratic was for me. I picked up E-Ratic, and I opened up the first page, and within 2 pages, I was immediately hooked. It was rare for a comic, especially like of this nature of superhero books and stuff, to get me right out of the gates like that. I'm very much a person who generally likes comics that take a little bit of time to build up. I'm very much a person who will give a comic like 6 issues to win me over. And I know some people don't like to do that. They're like, well, if the first issue is boring, I'm not going to give it a chance. And I understand I'm not saying you necessarily should, but in my experience, some of the best comics that I've read are comics that did take a little bit of build up to get to that payoff. One of my favorite writers, Robert Venditti, is famous for writing this way, right? Like, one of my favorite mainstream comics since I've been back into comics is his Hawkman run. But those first 5, I'd say about 5 issues of that was kind of boring. At least it seemed boring because I didn't understand where it was going to. I reread it now and it's like, oh, I know where it's going and it's cool. But at the time I was like, oh, whatever. It just felt like a normal thing. And then you get to the payoff. It's like a roller coaster. If you ever ridden a roller coaster and you go on that first, you got that climb to the top. It's like tick, 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 tick. It's like, that's no fun. But once you get to the top and you start to crest over, and some writers are like that. But sometimes right out of the gate, it's like being fired out of a cannon. I really liked E-Ratic. And the art style in this book is exactly on point to what the first series had. And if you haven't read E-Ratic at all, and you're watching this video, and you have if you think that you may read this, I urge you to stop now, this video. You can come back to the video later. It's not that I don't want you to watch it, but go get the first trade. It's $9.99. It's well worth it. Or go watch at least the videos that I did for the first E-Ratic, because I don't necessarily think you have to read E-Ratic 1 to read this book, but kind of you do. This book definitely follows off the story that built on the first. It assumes kind of who E-Ratic is. That first series was basically E-Ratic Year 1. It's E-Ratic's first adventure, and he's using his powers. It's his whole origin. It gives the background of him and his brother, who you can see here on this panel. That's his brother. He's got an older brother. Now, one of the things that I praise this book for is how much this feels like old school classic Spider-Man. It also has its own twist. It's very modernized. It feels kind of like the Stan Lee Ditko Spider-Man, or the Stan Lee Romita, the early years Spider-Man when he was like 16-year-old, he's a high school kid. But it feels like 2020 versus 1960s when Stan Lee was writing it. So it definitely feels modern. The kids have a more contemporary voice. Kari Andrews just has a different style of his presentation than Stan Lee did. So it's not like a carbon copy, but the essence of it feels very similar. The youthfulness of the character's desire to just do good and help people, it echoes that same principled nature of Peter Parker. His awkwardness that he doesn't get along. Like the brother, you can see here, the older brother's the cool kid. He totally gets along. And Ollie, the main character that's E-Ratic, he's the awkward, I think he's like a sophomore in high school. And he just doesn't fit in. He's a nerd. But after the first series here, he does manage to nab one of the popular girls at school. This blonde girl, I forget her name. Kristen, I guess what they're saying here. And that whole story is told in the first series, which, again, this is going to spoil stuff for you. So I urge you, just if you want to try this out, I think things are better without spoilers at all and not knowing where the story's going to go. You don't know if these two characters are going to get together in that first series. Now you do because it's spoiled. But she represents modern kids pretty well, I think. I think Kari, for the most part, gets high school kids. And she's a YouTuber, as an example. And she very much, her personality is very much it's very invested in the whole getting likes and followers. It's not so much as he makes videos. I think that's itself trivial, but just the psychology of the character being driven by this need for validation, I guess. I also really like that she is very high maintenance, and she's got these personality flaws, what we'd normally consider, but because these are kids, I feel like they're much more forgivable. I feel like the dislikable traits, especially like of this girl, I'm okay with it because they're kids and they still have growing up to do. Immaturity in kids is not as annoying as immaturity in adults. If foolishness, naivete in kids is not as irritating as it is in fully grown adults. And so there's a lot of room to play with and watch these kids make mistakes and go through these growing pains. You can see here that Kari Andrews' art is a bit cartoony in nature. For some reason, it doesn't bother me. I think it's because of the youthfulness of this book. I think it suits it quite well. I don't think because these kids are like 15 years old, I don't think that I would want them to look, all sexified. I can see that some people might just be like, well, they look kind of like weird, chibi, cartoony characters. But so what? I don't need to see, hot bods, to put it in a blunt term, because these are kids. That would be weird. And at no point does Kari ever try to make it weird. Now, they do have like the young romance and the different things, the awkwardness that these kids go through, but it's never portrayed in any sort of tasteless way. There's a lot of personality in this book. Every single character jumps off the page. For example, here we see the mom. She's a bit of a drunk. She's a single mom. Dad's been missing all these times. She's managed from the last book, to hook up with this bar. I think he's a bar owner, not just a bartender. So they're now seeing each other. And so there's some like comments that he'll have to the kids or whatever. And it just, everyone has like a personality, feels like a character. Even if I go back here, when they're on the school bus, one of the things I love is the way Kari writes. He kind of writes things that are happening in the background. So, like here we see these kids are on the school bus, and I think this girl here on the left is his brother's girlfriend. And this has nothing to do with the story, but it's all flavor. And she's like talking, what you listening to? Talking to this kid with the headphones. In the background, this bald kid, he's kind of the equivalent of Flash Thompson. He's kind of like a school bully, and he's beating up on this nerd, and he's like, you're in my seat, worm. And it's adding color to this world that Ollie inhabits. And sometimes it matters and sometimes it doesn't. In this particular scene, it goes too far and Ollie has to intervene. And I really like, I don't know, it just feels like this book has so many flavors. It's like eating a complicated food dish, if you ever had. It's just how all the different flavors come together to work and make a complex dish. I don't know how else to describe it. I'm good. But this book really has that. Now, one of the things that I really appraised the previous book for that got a little annoying to me in this book is Kari's use of like photo backgrounds in his panels. He does a good job of it, so I'm not too sour, but a couple times it really stood out. Like, for example, here where the scientist, he's in a factory floor. When you zoom in on that, it's just like obvious photo. And it's a little jarring, and I feel like it's a little bit of a cheater's way out. I want art. Now, when I shrink it down, it's not as visible, but there are times, like the school bus. This is a real school bus that he drew kids over. In a small panel, your eyes glance through it, and you don't notice too much. So when it works really well because it makes these panels feel really detailed. Like here, the sense of the bar. I mean, look at those bottles. And there's a lot of this would be a really pain in the ass to draw this much detail. So these photos can allow for these backgrounds. And here at the museum, I mean, it's a really beautiful shot. I mean, look at the detail here. But when you zoom in on it, you realize, oh, okay, this is not a drawing. This is like a photo of some cathedral or something, and then they run through a Photoshop filter. I'm normally I kind of go through these books and I just give a synopsis of what happened, but here I really feel like you should read these books yourself. And I did a review on the first ones anyway, and I think that's where you should start. This video is going to be, I think, mostly targeting people who read the first one and want to know, is the second one worth it? Is it picking up where the last one left off? Is it dropping the ball? What's going on? And I would say that this is a solid follow-up so far. It's only one issue in. It didn't knock my socks off the way the first one did, but I feel like it's a solid follow-up. The characters feel good, the same. They have the same personalities. I just like watching what happens. This was a scene that I really liked, where the dinosaur, they're at a museum or whatever, and the dinosaur starts coming to life, and everyone's like, run! And now Ollie, his whole thing is his powers only work for, I think, 15 minutes a day. So he's very limited in what he can do. And also, he has to expend his powers every day. They build up. I don't know if it's like a static charge or something. He has to expend it every day. Now, in this story, we learn that he's not been doing that. He calls himself backed up, but he's learned that if he meditates and remains calm and whatever, but he hasn't used his power in weeks. And so he's kind of a little gun shy here, and people need his help, and he's like, I don't want to use my power, and blah, blah, blah. And his girlfriend, Kristen, as people are crying, he's like, they're getting hurt, Ollie, and she just smacks him. She's like, stop being weak. And this is a really cool sequence here. I don't want to say woman, but she's not a woman. She's still a kid, but she's growing in to be a woman. And this is the strength that women have towards men, that I don't necessarily know if women understand this or not, of how they can inspire men, how they can sort of kick them in the butt to get them motivated, to knock some sense into them, but in a way that's very feminine and it's very supportive and not masculine, take charge. A lot of modern comics would be like, move over, I'm gonna do it, you're just a worthless guy. She likes him, she admires him, he's saved her life, and she doesn't want to see him be weak. And I just love this. Stop being weak. And the way the sequence, she slaps him, across one side, then back the other side, and then throws a punch. But on the last one, he catches her fist. And we see this is the entrance of E-Ratic into the second story here. And that's a really cool way for him to be like, he's back. And it just worked really well. It's very simple. It works better when you're actually reading it than me describing it. But so he's trying to fight, trying to save these people. Now, his powers haven't really been clarified. That's one fault I kind of have with the book, is that the author hasn't given you a clear definition of what the character can do. All I know is that he's got these sort of electrical tendril things, and he can use them to manipulate almost, like tendrils. He can grab things with them. Here he is propping the dinosaur's mouth open because it's going to crush these people, and he's telling them to jump, and they won't jump. They're too afraid, and he's like, if I move the jaws, they snap down on them. But if I don't move, my power's drained, and the jaws will snap down on them. So he's in a conundrum. What does he do? And then it's like, smash. And he's like, huh? And, oh, am I dead? Only if you stand in my way, oh, I'm in heaven seeing angels. And then we get introduced to this character. And of course, she looks remarkably similar to his girlfriend, but she's a busting beauty, sort of, I want to say Asgardian warrior, but she's not Asgardian. She's a Gartha. That's what she is. And she starts whooping ass. Now, immediately she sees E-Ratic as her enemy, and she's a sworn enemy of the Void. Now, that's part of where E-Ratic got his powers from, so you can kind of understand why she sees that. And in true, like, old school comic fashion form, they start fighting. And we get a good sense of action. Kari Andrews knows how to keep the action drama intense and interesting. They end up having to make a truce because the dinosaurs aren't dead. The dead dinosaurs aren't dead. The animated skeleton dinosaurs are still active, and so they have to work together to fight. And it's a pretty cool fight sequence. One of the girls gets hurt, and she's like really petty because Kristen didn't care about her. And it's true, this Kristen girl is really self-absorbed. She's got good character traits, like she does want the best for Ollie. Ollie's kind of won her over. She was a super bitch in the first series, but the goodness of him, they both kind of help each other. I really like their relationship. It's not super smooth, where it just makes you go, oh, this is just boring, because it's like, oh, look, they just love each other and they instantly fall. Like, they both have flaws, but then they both help improve each other, and it's kind of nice to see, and it feels very much like kids growing up, and that's something you don't get to see much in comics. I really like that. One of the other things that I like about this book that reminds me of is Super Sons. This is a totally different book than Super Sons, but the qualities is what I'm talking about. One of the things I fell in love with Super Sons is how Tomasi was able to bring that sort of coming of age, watching these kids, be kids, not know things, make mistakes and everything, and having to learn to grow up. This book has similar qualities of that too, and it's rare, I think, for authors to be able to nail youth in this fashion and not just make it completely annoying. So after the fight's all over, everything's back in their secret identities. We see her, she's doing her thing, she's trying to get, YouTube fame, being on, what just happened. And the girl, Iana, I guess is her name, she's going to stick around until this is destroyed. It's all, he comes up with a plan to be like, oh, you can be a foreign exchange student, blah, 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 blah. And immediately, just as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, that's going to make the girl jealous. And if she is, at first, she's so self-absorbed, she's going to like make video tubes about it. But eventually, she realizes, wait, you're doing what? She's going to stay with what's going on? And then she's like, I've had it up to here with all of your selfishness. All you care about are them and him and her. What about me? Oliver Leif, we are breaking up. It is so perfect. If it weren't so funny, it would feel bitchy, but it's just like, she's a 15-year-old girl. Like, it just works for me. And then, there's other kids like, hey, dude, you see Kristen? She was worried about you. And Ollie's just like shocked, like, not anymore. And so, anyway, so he's going to take her home. Let's say it'd be the foreign exchange student plan that they go, and he comes home, and surprise, Dad. So the whole time in the story from the first series, we don't know anything about Dad. He's just been missing. And so this is going to be interesting. Oh, what's going on? Where's Dad been this whole time? And so a little bit of a cliffhanger, I guess, in that sense. And then I'll put this up here in case you want to read that. So I really like this book. Like I said, I'm not quite as hyped for it as I was for the first one, But part of that is because now I know what to expect. Now the bar has been set. In the first book, I was like, what's this? I don't know anything about it. And then it was like, ooh, that discovery. So it's kind of hard to make a first impression a second time. You know what I'm saying? But this is a solid recommend. This is absolutely one of my favorite books still. I'm going to take more E-Ratic. If it's Kari Andrews writing and art, just keep going. Just give me more. I just want these characters. I just enjoy reading this ensemble of characters. They're all fun and quirky and interesting. I love his art style. These characters pop off the page. It's fun. Every panel just makes me kind of smile and feel good. This to me is what old school comics are about. This is what reminds me of when I got into Spider-Man back in the 80s when I always thought Spider-Man was kind of dorky and dumb. It wasn't my style. I'm more, or at least I used to be, very much more of the edgelord guy. I was into Punisher and Wolverine, and I wanted like I said, this dark and brooding, serious, the goofy heroes like Spider-Man, they came off as dorky to me. But I had a friend, a really good friend of mine, whose favorite character was Spider-Man, and I was like, what is it about Spider-Man that you like? I was just curious. I was like, and he talked to me about him. And he's like, I find him, he's just really funny, and I don't remember the things that he exactly said, but I remember him telling me that he was funny and how he would sort of like make fun of the villains as he was fighting them and all this stuff. And he's like, it just really makes me laugh. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. None of the characters I read are like that. So I picked up a Spider-Man book on my next trip to the comic book store. And it was during the Michelini run. I can't remember exactly which one it was. It was either when I think Todd McFarlane was still doing it. Yeah, it was, because Todd McFarlane hadn't got his new Spider-Man book yet. So Todd McFarlane was on Amazing Spider-Man. And it didn't hurt that I thought Todd McFarlane was good at art. And I immediately started getting it. I was like, oh, this is fun. Because it was so different than the stuff that I read. And watching Spider-Man just basically troll people, just dunk on people, and just, because his villains are kind of dorky anyway. So I just had a really good time. This book evokes that fun that comics can be. They don't always have to be dark and brooding. And I'm not saying that I like that, but I also like this. So tell me what you think about E-Ratic. Are you reading it? Did this book live up to your expectations? Are you going to start reading it if you hadn't? Or is this book still you're not convinced it's not for you? Leave comments down below. I love hearing what you guys have to say, opinions. My opinions are not the absolute end-all be-all. They're just my opinions. And I always just try to tell you guys, faithfully what's going on in my brain and how I feel. That's the whole reason I do this channel. It's just a hobby. It's just therapy, just for my life, to talk about comics. I love talking about comics. I miss the days of hanging out in the comic book store and just talking to comic nerds. Things have changed. Now we do it on the internet. So this is one of my top favorite comics. Definite high recommend, especially for people who like what I described about Spider-Man and stuff like that. If you like the light-hearted, quirky stuff, but not super lame. Like, other people try to do this, I think, but the writers in the main industry, they're just dull. They don't have anything to say. I think Kari Andrews has things to say, and he makes it interesting. So that's E-Ratic. I'll keep reading it, and if you guys want to know more, I did this video. I was going to do this one anyway, but I did have a viewer put in the comments that they wanted to get a review. So this one is for you. You know who you are. Thanks for watching.